Just a short video today about test routes. Some time ago I taught a lot of Kurdish men, and they were always asking me very early on in their training, when can we drive on the test routes, when can we drive on the test routes? And I used to say to them, at this stage it's a waste of time driving over there, because if you can do a turn in the road in here, in this road, you can do a turn in the road outside the test centre or near enough. They wanted to drive over those test routes because they felt that was critical. And so look, if you can turn right to traffic lights over here, you can turn right to traffic lights over there, so let's do the training over here and save time. And eventually, of course, as they got more test ready, we would drive over in the test area. There can be a preoccupation with test routes, I've noticed, not only with pupils, but strange to say, even with instructors. I don't want to be critical of my colleagues in the driver training industry. I'd hate to try and sound superior, but I've noticed not only from some of the titles of some of the schools on the road in Birmingham, but also from some of the stories I've heard from pupils that have come to me from other instructors, from some other instructors, that even instructors sometimes have a preoccupation with test routes. Now, that's not a good idea, I think. It is a good idea maybe when a pupil is close to being ready to do a few test routes, but we'll come back to that. Examiners are highly trained. The DVSA examiners are highly trained. Many of them are ex-instructors themselves. Sometimes they haven't instructed for very long. I've known men become examiners after doing maybe 6 months as an instructor. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that an experienced instructor may well be a better driver than some of the examiners. I think it's arguable that they're certainly, in many cases, the experienced instructors as good as the examiners, and if the examiners are new to the game, they may even be better. So the way I view it is that I am the one that decides whether my pupil is ready, because I see much more driving. The examiner should be looked upon really as a rubber stamp, and I think it would be good for those of us in the training industry to look at it in this way, that the test itself is only 40 minutes. What I like to do when I can, if my pupils are agreeable, I like to take them on a mock test, and obviously I want no serious marks on that. I don't want to fail. And then another one, and I'd like to see 2 clear passes, so that effectively they've driven for an hour and 20 minutes, and then I know they've got a good chance of passing. Also, I like to be sure in my own mind that they can deal with all sorts of traffic situations. And so what I will do frequently is, when they're getting close to test readiness, I'll take them where they've never been before. I'll throw them in the deep end to see whether they can cope. Because once you've passed your test, you haven't got much of a life, have you, if all you're going to do is drive around the test route. It's true, of course, that for most of us, whatever our employment, the majority of us, we're going to be driving in the roads that we drive on, we're going to be driving on pretty frequently, to and from work maybe, to and from the mother-in-laws, if you happen to get on all right with your mother-in-law, to and from wherever it is, the gym, whatever. And we will be inclined most of the time to be using the same roads, but it won't always be so, of course, will it? There'll be a time when maybe we make a new friend somewhere, or we've got to go and visit a distant relative or somebody that's sick. We've got to go out to the city, we've got to go on a long drive. Well, just knowing the test route isn't a great deal of help when you come to the real thing. So I always try to teach my pupils, and I'm sure there's so many other instructors do the same, not just to pass the test, but to be a safe driver after the test. And I really, and many another instructor, especially the more experienced ones, we are the better judge of whether a pupil is roadworthy, shall we say, you're going to be safe to drive than that 40-minute session with the examiner. I'm sure if the test was extended to an hour or an hour and a quarter, the failure rate would go up considerably. What we're seeking to do, of course, as we're training people, is to cut down to as low a level as possible the likelihood of an accident of any sort. And we all make mistakes. The best drivers make mistakes, and if any instructor tells you otherwise, he's got something to learn yet. We all make mistakes, all of us, sometimes even daft ones. But the better we get as drivers, of course, the less frequently we make them, the longer we're able to drive without making a mistake. And so your instructor really is the better judge of your readiness than the examiner is. And so I always try and look on the examiner as a mere rubber stamp. I want the people that learn with me to be able to get in their cars after they've passed their test, to drive confidently, to go and visit the mother-in-law, to go to Manchester or whatever, and not be frightened to death. There is always some nervousness. I remember having passed my test some years ago, my learner test. First 2 weeks was pretty nervous because you haven't got this voice sitting next to you if you make a mistake, and I think it's common to be nervous in that situation. But it's a good idea not to be just driving test routes, and I pick up on this sometimes from instructors. There's a preoccupation with test routes, and I just want to say that as far as I'm concerned, for me, and I would hope many other an instructor feels the same way, the examiner is just a rubber stamp. I'm not trying to be rude about examiners here, of course, but it's the instructor that knows, and it's the instructor that decides. So hopefully that's helpful. Try not to be too troubled about test routes if you can. If your instructor doesn't suggest it, ask him if he'll take you where you've not been before. Just on one final note, I took the Institute of Advanced Motorists test, I think about 2 years ago, and it was a long test. It was about an hour and 50 minutes. And at one point I said to the examiner, I've got no idea where I am. And he said, good. And that's the point. We need to be able to drive where we've never been before. You know, you might go on your normal route to work, and suddenly the road will be shut, and there'll be a diversion. You've got to cope with it. And so don't think test routes is the be-all and end-all. You want your instructor to put you in the deep end so that you can be safe afterwards. I hope that's helpful, and I hope you'll come back. And thanks for watching.